sometimes, sometimes in life, we can be very fortunate and we can come across people, individuals that can give us great value. Not to confuse you, I'm talking about martial arts and more uh, specifically martial arts instruction by instructors. As I began to say, sometimes in life we can be very fortunate and we can come across individuals that can give us great value as relates to instruction, knowledge, training, if you will, in the martial arts. This does not always happen, but it's a wonderful thing when it does. When you don't really have to question what it is that you're being taught, you believe it. It's been proven. It's been battle tested, so to speak, and you believe in it. It was not so much the case with myself coming up. Um, I became great, and I speak to my shame as a human being. This is not to brag, but I became great as a martial artist by questioning my art, and for that matter, my arts, the various disciplines that I studied and trained in. You see, when I came up as a child, I was always fascinated by martial arts. And as many of you may already know, Bruce Lee inspired me. I had an uncle that began to teach me combat jiu-jitsu, then another friend of the family that began to teach me karate, and then I was enrolled into my first karate school and began to study other disciplines along the way. But when I was in my initial karate school, martial arts school, uh, what I enjoyed about it was we had a plethora of disciplines under that umbrella. We learned Tong Sudo, which is Korean, originally influenced by Chinese martial arts, Tong, hence the name, Tang Dynasty. And we had Taekwondo, which is Korean. We also had Judo, and we had boxing, and we also did kickboxing. And we would have occasional kung fu instructors come in and we trained with them, such as Grandmaster James Cook, who was one, just to name one of them. But anyway, I enjoyed that. But our school was heavily Korean influenced in the early years. But myself, and I believe that this is just something I was born with, I've always been inquisitive. And I've always been very observant. And when I looked at what we did, I didn't have anything to really measure it by other than the jiu-jitsu that I learned from my uncle and the karate from a friend around that same time, early on. And when I began to venture off into the Korean martial arts, it seemed that it was, now that I look back in hindsight, it was a copying of a lot of things. More specifically, katas or hong, pumps for some. And we really thought we were doing something, the classmates and so forth. And of course, we would go to competition and we would run these forms. We'd win and we'd lose in competition in forms. And being a very young preteen and then a teenager, I had nothing to really compare what I was doing to. And it was not until I began to grow a little bit older, more mature, be exposed to other arts outside of our school, that is, that I began to see what was practical. We sparred, we had boxing, we had kickboxing, we engaged in these matches, we had karate, open martial arts tournaments as well, and judo. All of those things we had. But when I began to leave that and go off into Kung Fu and then Jiu-Jitsu and so forth, Wing Chun, my mind took me elsewhere. It was already really there, but I had such a loyalty and respect for my teachers at the original school. I would never, defy their teaching or go against their teaching because of respect. But I always had something inside that said, we don't have the only thing. There's something other than what we do that can enhance me. And I'm speaking in respect to myself, that can enhance me as a martial artist. And when I said in the early part of the video, so what I'm really getting at is I never believed that any particular cultural martial arts style and or system had everything. I was open. You see, there are some people who subscribe to just what they've been taught, if it's one art or one discipline. For example, if you study Shotokan, there are people who are just purely, strictly Shotokan and nothing else. They won't even pay too much attention to any other arts. They stay closed housed in their own style or system. There are people who are in Goju-Ryu. They won't veer away from Goju-Ryu. They keep it traditional. There are people who study Wado-Ryu or Ishin-Ryu or Shito-Ryu or Chito-Ryu or Shori-Ryu or Wing Chun or Balintawat or Bagua, and they don't intermix other arts as if their arts are complete. There are very few arts that I have experienced that I would consider or deem as being complete. When I say complete, I mean works in virtually every aspect of fighting, as it were. My philosophy is from standing to the ground. Your art should be effective standing, sitting, and on the ground. If you have an art that's only geared towards and based on just standing, you are limited because that's one element. If you have an art that's only entrenched in ground fighting only, and this is something that we see in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu a lot and some other Jiu-Jitsu schools as well. I'm not picking on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or BJJ, but they only focus on ground fighting and not standing. And if you notice and have watched the UFC, Pride Fights, and similar MMA competitions, you will notice that most of the Jiu-Jitsu guys that fight mainly on the ground, they can't strike standing up, not effectively. And on the reverse of that, you have some karateka, some Muay Thai people who can strike effective standing up, but they are weak on the ground and oftentimes even helpless on the ground because they have not learned that element of fighting. Okay, I hope that was fair in my explanation. But anyway, as I began to say earlier, when I was talking about me being a great martial artist, now that's a matter of opinion of some others as to whether or not I am great. My students believe that I'm great. But when I say great, I'm not comparing myself to anyone. Let's make that perfectly clear. When I say great, I'm talking about myself and the development of me, brother teacher Reginald. So I have the mind to constantly be trying to improve. Even in my age now, almost 60 years old, I'm always trying to improve. So where I was last year, I'm not the same place this year. And I would hope next year that I'm not where I was this year, next year. I hope to always see some form of improvement, even if it's not just on a physical level, but more spiritual in what I do and how I believe as it relates to martial arts. And I did say believe. So I've said before, uh, martial arts is not just simply about kicking and punching. It is a spiritual undertaking. It's not about who you can beat, who's the best karate fighter, who's whipped so many individuals, and who has more wins versus losses against another individual. That's not martial arts. Those are people that want to make a living using martial arts as the means or the vehicle for making that living. It's no different than someone working at Walmart. That's their means to making a living. Someone who wants to be a police officer, that's their means to making a living. Someone who wants to work at a gas station or at a factory or as a lawyer or as a not a physician but as a pharmacist, whatever the vocation is, that's what people choose. Now, martial arts is no different. There are people who want to make a living and who do make a fairly decent living teaching martial arts. But we must be able to separate practical fighting from sport. They are not the same. They're not intertwined. Even though the elements, many of the elements and the foundations in the sport can translate to the street, but it's not really the same. Okay, so what has made me a greater martial artist is the fact that I remain a student. My mind is always open to something new that I don't know, have not experienced. I'm not boxed in to the point where I can say, well, I have it all. I don't. I learn from everyone. I learn from my students still, even my younger students. Sometimes there are situations when I'm in class and I'll see someone do a particular technique or even make a statement, and it makes me have one of those aha moments, and I say, oh wow, that was interesting, that was illuminating. You see, I'm always learning. That's what I mean when I say made me and makes me a greater martial artist. So one thing I do know, and this is the crux of the matter, what I really wanted to point out in this video was this. When I was coming up, our great grandmaster, when he taught my master instructors, he didn't give them all of the information. Now he's Korean, the instructor that I'm talking about, my great grandmaster. So he only taught Americans so much. He didn't teach them certain other things. And I believe that he did it intentionally. I don't believe that masters, grandmasters of systems and styles, always give everything to their students. I believe sometimes they keep things to themselves because they don't find a student that's worthy enough to learn certain aspects of their style of system. And if they are foreign or foreigners, especially Asian martial arts instructors, I still do believe firmly that there are many things that they won't share with Americans, even though they teach Americans. There are many things that they won't share with Americans because we are not native to their country. They'll give us only so much. And these are the things that I was alluding to early on that we did not get coming up. For example, and I'll conclude and get out of your way. When we learned the forms, what some call kata, Japanese call them kata, pums, hon, what have you. When we were learning forms, we were not taught all of the specific reasons behind some of the techniques. We were given some specific things and we were given some general things. And All we could be taught was what our instructor was taught. He or she couldn't give us anything more than what they were given by their chief instructors. So it made us later on, especially me, I should say, begin to research and say, wait a minute, that form was missing something. Or that form has a hidden movement in it, or what some term as, a secret move that was not exposed to us. It was not revealed to us that that move meant something, or it translated into this particular technique. We were never given that. I found these things out in later years. They're hidden techniques in the form or the forms that we were never taught. We were never given the meaning of some of the movements. So basically what I'm saying in essence is that we were just copying movements, oftentimes in the forms, only taught in part and not in whole. And it was done deliberately by our great great grandmasters. That was all I really had to say. So I said that to say this as I close. It is important to be an individual. It just really is. You see, if you are an individual, then it means that you are not led around by someone else's dogma just because they tell you that this is what it is and that's it and that's all. And you can't question it. You can't say, Master, what does this movement mean? Or can you translate this movement? They'll only give you so much, but they have the answer, the real answer, but they're only going to give you so much. Or they might tell you you're not ready for this particular thing, or when you're ready I'll show it to you. In some senses or some instances it's appropriate, but not all. Sometimes they just don't want to teach you certain things. I'll leave you with this. I have students that are children, that are real young. I will not teach them anything that has to do with a gun. I guess you can figure out that it's obvious why, right? I don't want them to ever have in their mind at their age, 6, 7, 8, 10 years old, that they will ever have to deal with a gun, because I don't want that on my conscience. So I don't want to say, well, if someone holds a gun against you, because kids are very impressionable. Sometimes if they're in the wrong situation, they may feel confident, falsely, or emboldened to try to insert themselves in a situation where there is a gun and end up becoming a fatality. So I leave that alone. I only teach things that are that dangerous, to include knife play, with my older students who are very mature enough to comprehend what's going on. And I wait till my children get of age or become of age where they are mature enough to deal with that type of situation. However, I will teach my children defense against a stick, defense against, someone with a chain, things of this sort. But I don't deal with bladed weapons, and I don't deal with knives as it relates to my younger children, for their safety's sake. So, again, when I was coming up, I was given certain things in terms of teaching: Tang Soo, Taekwondo, Judo, boxing, and so forth in my much earlier years. But I knew that there was something greater than that. And I always wanted to explore other possibilities as it relates to other martial arts disciplines. And I did just that. When I was at my original school, I was sort of frowned upon, but envied and respected at the same time. I was frowned upon to a degree because I was sort of cutting away from the tradition. Because even this very day, I am traditional and I'm also non traditional. I believe that once you get to a certain point after you have the foundation, and when I say foundation, I mean foundation, once you have the groundwork set, then you can see clearly to build upon that. You see, for example, a correct punch, a correct front kick, a correct ippon senagi or shoulder throw, a correct juji katami or arm bar, straight arm lock, or a correct nikio, wrist lock, or a correct sun fist, chung choi, or being able to initiate and take a fall, ukimi, or being able to stand in a kibadachi, kimajase, or mabu, which is a side straddle stance or horse stance, and you have firm balance, posture, having a significant amount of flexibility based on whatever your level is, and understanding certain pressure points and vital spots on the human body. Once you have these things down, the foundation, you don't need all of the other baggage. There may be some that might disagree with what I'm saying. That's your prerogative. Maybe you don't fully comprehend what I'm saying, and maybe you do. All I'm really saying is that we cannot be enslaved by someone else's dogma, uh, and at the same time losing our own individuality. I want to fly. I want to be a creative force in anything that I endeavor to do. I don't want something that's 1,000 years old or hundreds of years old to dictate that this is the only way that you can function, teacher. This is the only way that you can function, Reginald, and there's nothing else. When my heart, my spirit, my intuition says that I can do something different, or I can be better than this says I could be, if I only move this direction, if I tweak it this way to fit me, my personality, and my character, then I've done myself a great justice and not an injustice. You only have one life to live, ladies and gentlemen. Be yourself. That's all I'm saying. This is to all of my martial arts masters, grandmasters, and practitioners. Be yourself. Don't let any system or style define you. You define yourself, as I define brother teacher. That was it. Let me know what you think about this little rant that I just went on, and I'm concluding now, in the comment section below. And take care, be blessed.